Hello, everybody. Welcome to Playing to Lose. My name is Soren Johnson. Thanks for coming. And I also want to remind everyone, please turn off your cell phones. So let's get started here. So first off, just a little introduction. My background is in computer science. I did some work on genetic and learning AI back in school. And since then, I have done various design work, especially on the Civilization series, and for each of those games, I was also the main AI programmer. And I'm currently a programmer designer on the Spore team, and doing some more AI work there. All right, so here's a basic outline of the talk. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about sort of a philosophical question about what's the difference between what I term good and fun AI, and then where Civ falls on that spectrum. Then I want to give talk for a little bit about cheating, because that's it's a very difficult topic to get a beat on. It's often hard to come up with the right question of exactly how your AI should cheat, whether it's a good idea, are you being fair to the player, is that a question you can even answer, and so on. Then I'm going to go into some development details about the Civ AI in specific, about some of the choices we made during the development process. And at the very end, I'm going to provide a link to the AI code, which was released about a year ago, I think. And hopefully we'll have time for some Q&A. Okay, so first off, what's the difference between what I term good versus fun AI? Generally speaking, and what a lot of people really do think of as AI is this, for strategy games at any rate, is the idea of artificial intelligence that can beat the player at their own game. That is, it's essentially a human substitute. This is the AI taking over for what a human would normally do, and they're trying to win. They're trying to beat you at this game. However, there is another side of AI in strategy games, which is so what you call fun AI, and this is where the actual algorithms are the content of the game. The way the AI constructed is what makes the game either fun or not. It's not necessarily looking to beat you; it's looking to provide you an interesting experience. That's essentially the key here. The player is the focus. And these are very few games kind of fit exactly in either of these categories. The trick is really trying to figure out where your game fits in. So the canonical example of good AI, of course, is Deep Blue, finally beating the world's greatest chess player at his own game. I mean, that's always the ultimate example. This is another good example here of computers ruining the fun for the rest of us, and figuring out that checkers is now a solved game. There's sort of a branch of AI that loves to do this, and they're computers sort of making fun of us poor humans. As I sort of said, the core idea here is the AI is sitting in as a human substitute. This is especially appropriate for a lot of games where it's often hard to find people willing to play, sort of an old school war game with you or whatever. This is one of the reasons why a lot of the first AI in games back in the 80s were usually revolved around good old-fashioned hex-based war games. Now, fun AI is very different, right? Just as this what's going behind in chess or any of these hex-based games is AI. This is AI too, but very, very different. The AI that you see in black and white when you're teaching your creature how to develop, or the AI that goes into the Sims, which determines what they like, what they don't like, what makes them upset, what they run away from, these type of things. Here's what in my mind is a good example of this type of AI. In recent games is desktop tower defense. Where essentially the game is about pathfinding, right? It's fun to create your maze and see where the little guys go, and you're essentially playing with whatever pathfinding algorithm that they put into the game. That's what makes it fun. And the real key here is that, the focus of fun AI is on the player. The player is supposed to be having an interesting experience. You're putting either a series of challenges in front of them or giving them this sort of interesting sandbox to play with. You're trying to see, exactly what's going to come of it. And, in the MMO world, a good example of this is the concept of aggro, right, which is kind of a pretty strange concept if you think of it from, the perspective of an AI programmer. So for people who aren't familiar with the basics of MMO combat, you basically have three types of characters who are involved when you fight, fight mobs, when you fight AI characters, NPC characters. You have your tanks, which are the characters who absorb damage because they have high defense. You have your healers who can, heal the tank to make sure they don't die. And then you have your DPS characters, which are the ones that are actually going to be dealing damage to the NPCs to ultimately kill them. And the aggros determines, who these NPC characters are going to attack, right? Are they going to attack your tank or your healer or your mage and your thief or whatever? And so, presumably there is some AI code in there that determines what it's supposed to do. And when you're playing a game like WoW and you're fighting in this group, when you're healing the tank, you want to heal, but you don't want to heal too much because the algorithms determine that if you heal the tank too much, then the AI monsters are going to start attacking you, and that's not good because your healers are weak characters. And then the same is true for the DPS characters. They want to attack the mob and, put as much, inflict as much damage on them as possible, but not too much because the AI algorithms will determine, okay, if you cross a certain threshold, then we're going to attack the mage in the back instead of the paladin who's up front. And so most sort of raid strategies that evolve in MMO games are all about how to sort of handle this balance. But the thing is, the developers are not really interested in solving this problem, right? It's fine that everyone basically knows how aggro works, and it's very predictable, and in fact, it's so predictable, or rather, even maybe exposed is the better word, that you even have sort of these aggro interface mods in World of Warcraft, where you literally can see how how the aggro changes and it goes up and down. It's almost become commoditized, like any old game mechanic, like hit points or armor class. So this is not something that the Blizzard is interested in solving from a good AI point of view. They're not trying to be roll the dice, let it be unpredictable. Keep the player guessing about what the monsters are going to do. They like the fact that it's predictable and that it's essentially a puzzle to solve. So essentially what I'm proposing here is that most strategy games can fit somewhere along the spectrum. From good, which is the AI you need to play chess, to fun, the AI behind games like tower defense. So, for example, StarCraft kind of fits on the left end of the scale here. Part of the reason is that it's a symmetrical game, symmetrical in terms of what the players' goals are. Obviously, it's sort of the canonical example of asymmetrical game balance, but everyone's always basically trying to do the same thing in StarCraft. You're trying to wipe out all of your opponents. You're playing essentially under the same rules. Your race may be different, but the goals and outcomes are all essentially the same. Another thing that's key here, which I'll talk a lot more about later, is there's no real diplomacy inside of StarCraft. Generally speaking, a lot of people, there are people play free-for-alls, but there's a lot of team play, and when you're playing with the AI, generally the assumption is they want to kill you, and that is the end of it. You're not making these complicated alliances to try to turn the battle to your side. And diplomacy is a real sticky problem for AI, and that's something that I'll be coming back to a lot when I get back to Civ. I'd say that a game like Heroes of Might and Magic kind of falls more on the right side of the scale, but there's plenty of more examples. It's a little more asymmetrical. It's really kind of like it's why it has aspects of a role-playing game. It's really kind of a series of challenges that the player goes through, and the developers are not as purely focused on this kind of chess-based zero-sum classic strategy game problem. And in my mind, civilization kind of fits somewhere right around the middle of the scale, which creates a lot of sort of tricky problems. I think the thing that really makes this happen is that civilization has a deep diplomacy system, but it's crossed with very symmetrical game design, where all of the AI elements in the game, they're all really playing the same game as you. They all start with a settler, and they build cities, and they build units, and they're all playing the exact same game as you are. So those things cross together lead to some interesting problems. So first, though, I want to drill down on some of the specifics that kind of tend to go with these two ends of the spectrum. Generally speaking, the rules, games that tend to be on the good side tend to have a very fixed rule set. Chess is a great example. Obviously, hasn't changed in years and years and years. StarCraft. If you look at a lot of the, there's not a lot of information out yet, obviously, about StarCraft 2, but you can tell by hearing what the developers say that they're very respectful of what comes before. They aren't looking to just completely radically change the game. Something like desktop tower defense, in fact, if you don't play it for a few months and you go back to it, you might suddenly realize that the game has changed while you've been gone. This is sort of this constantly evolving process, and I think these things tend to be linked. As I said before, there's a big sort of difference in symmetry and asymmetry here. Desktop tower defense, it's just a very fundamentally asymmetrical game. You're definitely not playing the same game as your AI opponents. And this is very important. There's also, this is maybe a little more, well, this question is, what's the best environment to play these games in, which of course is a little subjective, but generally speaking, games like chess and StarCraft, they always, people who are really into these games, it ultimately seems to be about multiplayer experience, playing with other people. There is no multiplayer desktop tower defense. That doesn't even make sense. You could do something, but you would, one way or another, you'd still be playing very different games. And what leads to these differentiations is the symmetry or asymmetry of the game design. And here's another sort of what I think is a very interesting one, is the question of what tactics are available to the AI. In other words, what is the AI willing to do to win or create a challenge for you? In chess, clearly, right, in chess AI, everything's available. It's not like you would write a chess AI where you're like, okay, I don't think castling is a very, is a good strategy. I don't think castling is something that's a legitimate strategy. I'm just going to not write that into the AI. You're going to include everything. You're not going to leave anything out. For a game like desktop tower defense, it's very unclear what the rule set is for the opponent, but there are clearly things that these mobs moving through your defenses could do that they don't do, right? They could have these little monsters going through your maze. They could have them all gather in one place for a while so that they have more strength. They could have them take suboptimal routes if they think they are safer. There's a lot of stuff that, as an AI programmer, you could do, which they just choose not to do. They are specifically choosing at a very high level to have, a limited set of tactics to make the game more fun for the player. Here's another sort of tricky one, is like, how do you measure the performance of your AI? In a game like chess, obviously there's a very, very clear way to determine, how good the AI is performing. You have some very, very good heuristics there. And generally that's true of, symmetrical zero-sum games. But yeah, for, games like Heroes Might and Magic and Desktop Tower Defense, they're much more puzzle-like. It's very subjective, so, it's really much more almost a question of difficulty, than it is a question of, a performance. You'll never have a final answer there. And then, of course, this is AI, so there's the question of the Turing Test. Would the AI pass for a human if you didn't know what was on the other side? In chess, yeah, we couldn't tell anymore. The chess can be as good as humans, that's done. for a game like Desktop Tower Defense, it's irrelevant, right? I mean, no one thinks that these mobs moving through your defense are actually are actually controlled by humans. It's not really a question you would even think about. I'll get to it later, but it's kind of interesting to think of where Civ falls on this spectrum, because it has definite issues with the Turing test, but it's clearly not irrelevant. People would like to think that they're playing against actual people. So here's sort of a summary comparison of where all the different things line up for the different categories of good AI versus fun AI. And one way to sum this up, might be that with good AI, you're really playing to win, and with fun AI, you're essentially playing to lose. The AI is playing to provide an interesting experience while losing to the human. I mean, this is essentially what those games are about. And so, where does Civ fit in this world? Am I making a game where the AI is playing to win, or am I making a game where they're playing to lose? First off, just for people who aren't familiar with it, I just want to give a quick history of civilization. Civ is sort of the classic God game, developed by Sid Meier back in the early 90s. It had this, really very, addictive and compelling turn-based game mechanic, where he had, sort of multiple goals overlapping with each other, so that people could never really get up to the computer, because there's always one more. You got to research the technology, which will let you build a pyramid, which will let you switch governments, and then it's 4 a.m. It was a great game. I mean, I'm sure almost everyone here has played it. Civ 2 came along in '96, sort of taking the sort of the classic sequel route of Civ 1's a great game, so let's start adding on some more stuff, add some extra units, buildings, technologies, so on and so forth. It moved to an isometric view, left the sort of old board game style behind. Layered on some complexity to paper over, some of the simplicities of Civ 1. You added hit points, a trading system, for example, and also finally opened up the game to modders, so they could create their own scenarios and alter certain aspects of the rules. Civ 3 came along, and this was the first Civ product I was involved on. I was the co-designer, and I wrote most of the game and AI code. With Civ 3, we felt that we couldn't just keep adding units, buildings, technologies. Otherwise, the game would kind of go down the complexity death spiral. We didn't want the game to get so heavy and overburdened that new players would be intimidated by it. So we sort of added these new orthogonal but fairly simple systems to the game, things like culture, that as you build libraries, they extend your borders, for example. Resources like oil would pop up, and you would need oil to build battleships, and might encourage you to invade your neighbor, that type of thing. We included a rules editor, so you could fundamentally add as many new units to the game as you wanted to, and set their values to anything. We added animation, which was all the rage back in 2001, I guess. Civ 4 came along about 3 years ago. I was the lead designer, and I wrote all of the game and AI code for that. We added some new orthogonal systems. Religion and great people are a couple examples. We actually really started everything from scratch from that game. We actually simplified a lot of the core game mechanics. We took out a lot of things like corruption and city riots and pollution, and there's a bunch of things that we just cut out from the game because we didn't feel like they were adding anything. We wanted to get to a very, very pure, simple experience. We built this multiplayer game from the very beginning, which was definitely a new thing for Civ. Allowed us to. It was nice because we were able to try out our game design ideas right off the bat. The game was very, very open for modders. We used XML for all our data, and a lot of the interface and a certain amount of the game code and game events were all accessible through Python. Finally, it was a fully 3D world. So that's a Civ in a nutshell. how does Civ compare to sort of these other games on the scale here? Where does it fit in along the sort of the different criteria I set for the differences between good and fun AI? So, for example, I would say that I can't really determine where Civ fits on whether it's fixed rules or evolving design. As I obviously said, we've gone through 4 iterations of the game. Some things will definitely never change. It'll always be a tile-based game. It'll always be a turn-based game. It'll always be about growing your people from as a primitive settler to modern civilization. But there have been a lot of new things added onto the game that the AI has had to take into account for as we go from project to project. There's certain parts of the AI that we could move forward from previous projects, but other things just had to be created whole from scratch again. Civ is a symmetrical game. You're playing against probably like 6 or 7 other AI civilizations, and they are playing the same game as you. They have to build cities, they have to research texts, they have to build buildings. The victory conditions are the same as yours. It's a very symmetrical game. However, it's also, generally speaking, been more of a single-player game than a multiplayer game. I think that describes the majority of people who play Civ play it for that single-player experience, which leads to more of, where there's more aspects of role-playing that you want to go involved with the AI. It's very much about diplomacy, about finding your own story within a game of Civ. It has limited options. This may not be obvious if you to people outside of the development team, but there are a lot of options that we do not put on the table for the AI. Especially in what I sort of term as the diplomacy problem, which is really the key problem that you have to solve when writing AI for a game like Civ. It's just flat out not okay for the AI to engage in some of the same diplomatic strategies that the human might. For example, a very common strategy in Civ is for people to, you're fighting a war with, the French or whatever, and you're beating them. They're doing very poorly. So you come to them and you say, okay, if you give me all your technologies, I'll give you peace. I'll let you guys live in peace, and you can go back to your cities and so on and so forth. And the AI agrees to that. They give you your technologies, and then of course you're human. You can do whatever you want to. You just attack them again the next turn, right? We've all done that. It's okay. But it's not okay for the AI to do that, right? There's nothing in the rules that prevent the human from doing that. But we wouldn't write the AI to do that. That just wouldn't be a fun experience. This is a little bit maybe harder to be clear about, because there's obviously always going to be a lot of subjective factors, but there definitely are some basic objective measures you can put to the Civ AI to see how it performs. We had automated testing that we used throughout the project to see how the Civ AI was performing, where every morning I would come in and I would check the latest AI build to see how the AI is performed in an AI only game, and I could clearly see when things were getting better and when things were getting worse, so on and so forth. So there definitely are some objective ways to test the Civ AI. And the Turing test, it actually doesn't even fall into either categories. It just flat out fails the Turing test. This kind of goes back to the diplomacy issue. Humans don't play very nice. Humans do whatever they want to. They don't role play, and that's really what we want the AI to do in a game of Civ. So I don't think anyone is convinced that there's actually 7 humans on the other side of your computer when you're playing the AI in Civ. Civ is kind of somewhere in the middle, and this is kind of the art of writing strategy game AI, is figuring out where you fit on the spectrum, and striking the best balance when appropriate for all the different aspects you have to implement when writing AI. And the need for balance is compounded by the fact that we have many different types of players who come to the game. We have people who come to the game looking for a challenge, people who are looking for that kind of sandbox experience where they're just have this sort of world they're playing with. We have people who are coming looking for narrative. There's a story, and they want to develop a story so they can tell about it. They're going to put it up on their website. They're going to have lots of screenshots, or they're going to just tell their friends about this crazy thing that happened when Gandhi dropped a nuclear bomb on them. There are definitely people who play the game for that reason. So for the narrative player, that's why we really within the AI we aim for personality. Tokugawa plays the game very different from George Washington or Gandhi. Obviously plays the game very different from Montezuma, who will attack you immediately. It's fine that Tokugawa, for example, he's the Japanese leader. The Japanese were traditionally very closed off, so he's very reluctant to trade his technologies, very reluctant to trade his resources. He kind of likes to keep to himself. This is not a good strategy in Civ, right? This is not the optimal strategy, but that's fine. We're aiming for personality. We want the player to feel like they're playing against 7 distinct personalities, not 7 optimal AIs. We maintain a memory so that they remember what you've done to them over the course of the game, whether you have the same religion as them, whether you helped them out in the past, whether you guys have been trading. This helps people feel like they get connected to various different leaders. It's okay for the AI to fall for certain types of traps. If the player feels like they were really clever and they set up the situation that is really going to screw over one of the other AIs, that's cool. We want the player to have fun. So we're not over paranoid about closing every hole for a way that the players can kind of have their fun manipulating the AI. And at the end of the day, really, we have to remember that we want the player to win the game. That's what this is about. We want them to enjoy the game, and we want them to. My ideal situation is always for everyone should. The best thing I could hope for if every player who ever played Civ always eked out a victory in the last few turns, right? That's always the optimal situation. But I definitely would favor towards making sure they win rather making sure they lose. And if they do lose, it's very clear that they have some sort of high-level understanding of what happened, what went wrong, what they can do different the next time. So we're definitely not we're not out looking trying to beat the player. So for the difference between the sandbox and the challenge players, how do we balance the interests of these players? And clearly one of the biggest tools you have to use is your difficulty levels. You can adjust the game for these different types of players, give a different level of aggression. You can increase the type of tactics that are available to the AI. There's lots of things you can do. But this inevitably leads to the question of AI cheating, because that's kind of the biggest lever you're going to have to adjusting your difficulty levels. So I'm going to talk for a while here about AI cheating. This is a really, really, really subjective topic. There's definitely no one right answer here. We can debate for days over a lot of these questions here. But first off, let me go back to the original scale here, and where does cheating fit on this? Clearly, on the far left end of the scale, you wouldn't want to have cheating in a game ever, right? You wouldn't want to play against a chess AI that suddenly warped their pieces around the board, right? That's not a good move. And it's just completely not applicable on the right end of the scale. There is no concept of cheating in desktop tower defense because, you're playing the game in their world. It's not. If the units acted really unpredictably and were popping all over the place, I guess that would be a problem. But they're making the world to be consistent, and it just stays that way. And people aren't really thinking about, whether the AI is cheating or not. So what happens in the middle here? Is this one of the aspects of the middle? Is this where cheating kind of has to come out when you're in these shades of gray in between? That's kind of where I feel like we've had to end up for a lot of these strategy games that do kind of fall in between the two poles here. And here are the production modifiers in Civ 4. We had 9 difficulty levels. Just as an aside, it seems like we can never have enough difficulty levels in Civ. I think we probably added one for every iteration of the game. They always seem to make people happy having another. And obviously there's some at the scale I don't want to go because, it's crazy to have 20 difficulty levels, but it's incredible how many gradations there are of players and, all their different expectations about how difficult the game is going to be. So here are the 9 different levels, along with, what the basic production modifiers are for them. How much cheaper or how much more expensive it is to buy technology, build a unit, construct a building, and so on. And here it is in chart form. So you can see it's it's a pretty big swing from one extreme to the other. But a lot of people, and let me jump back here for a second. You see there in the middle there is noble, and that's the sort of quote unquote even level. But I've always been very careful not to try not to describe it that way, because when you get down to the bottom of it, it's virtually impossible in a game like Civ to have a truly even level. The noble level in Civ does have a number of other cheats. The AI gets bonuses, for example, when fighting animals and barbarians. It gets unit support and unit upgrade bonuses so that it can maintain a larger army than the human. It doesn't have to deal with inflation and war weariness as much. And there are important reasons for each of these specific cheats. Probably the best example here is the concept of unit support and unit upgrades. The player is in control of the game, right? They are in the driver's seat. If they don't like what's happening, they quit, they load a previous version, they start a new game, they open up the world builder, they essentially do whatever they want to. And beyond that, we're trying to find a fun experience for them. We're trying to, help them have an interesting game and, so on and so forth. But there are certain things that, because of that freedom that the human has, there are certain things that they can do that an AI could just never do. We've all probably seen or played Civ games where we've left a large number of our cities just empty, right? Because we know that if perchance, we suddenly get attacked, we can reload the number of turns before, or we played the game enough to know that, we can really trust our neighbors, so on and so forth. Clearly, this is not a strategy that I could have adopted for the AI, right? I couldn't think that okay, well, there's some humans that leave their cities empty. Maybe that's a legitimate strategy. Maybe I should think about AIs which leave their cities empty, right? This is just not going to happen. And because of that, when you're balancing the game, there's just no way that the unit support costs in Civ, it means you have to pay a certain amount of gold for each unit you have overall. The size of an AI army and the size of a human army is just never going to be the same in a game of Civ. So it's kind of if I wanted to say that there is this one even level where the production bonuses are the same and the unit support costs are the same and so on and so forth, that's really essentially an academic exercise, right? That doesn't really actually do anything to help make the experience better for the player. It only makes the experience better for people who are actually concerned about this type of stuff, concerned about, really into the nuts and bolts of AI and what that means. What I'm concerned about is just a nice slow difficulty ramp from settler all the way up to deity. It's definitely my opinion that cheats should not be linear, that it's not, meaning that, they shouldn't be a smooth ramp in all ways. There's going to be certain categories that you're going to want to help the AI in more and certain categories you don't. And that it's really, for a game as complex as Civ, that it is fundamentally impossible to have any sort of even level. And that's without even talking about diplomacy. But the really important thing when you're talking about cheats, though, is that the game should never feel unfair. And there were definitely some issues with this in previous versions of Civ. Civ 1, and I'm not sure if this was in Civ 2, but the earlier games had the free wonder problem, where, not problem, this is just the way Sid wrote it, that if the human was ahead to a certain extent, he would just give the Egyptians the pyramids for free, for example. They just suddenly, boom, they would have the wonder. And I think probably at the time he didn't anticipate how much attention would be paid to Civ. It was just some game he was working on that was really unprecedented. Who knows what the attention how many times people would actually play these games. But it didn't take long before people realized this was going on, and it really, really bugged a lot of people. It was just one of these things that even though people knew the AI was cheating, that the different difficulties meant something, this was one of these cheats that just felt wrong. It felt like the AI got something that it didn't deserve. It's funny to think, because it's not much different to say that at the highest difficulty level, the AI gets everything for half cost, right? I mean, that at the end of the day, they're going to be able to build wonders that you can't, but that's just very different from just giving them something out of the blue. And then another big issue here is, or another big mistake, I guess, was that in the original Civ 1 code, there was literally some code that said, if the year is 1900 and the human is in the lead, declare war on the human. Like, it was just, that's what the code was. And that from maybe the earlier days of game design, that wasn't actually too unusual of a decision. But as things have developed, people really want to feel like the AIs are not treating you any differently from the way they're treating each other. That's definitely the optimal situation. It makes people more invested in the story, less feeling like the computer is going to put some sort of arbitrary stumbling block in front of you just to make the game more challenging. So for Civ 3 and Civ 4, to the best that we could, and there's definitely some problems here, reasons you can't ever get this 100%, but to the best that we could, we had human blind diplomacy. In the part of the code where it determines who the AI is going to declare war on, there is literally at no point does it ever make a call to is human. At no point does it determine, is this a human civilization, is this not? I'll weight those two different things differently. It's really looking at those in the function where it determines how much it should value a tech in a tech trade. Also, it's not testing is human whatsoever. To the best that we could, we really wanted the diplomacy to be completely blind to whether it was dealing with a human or not. We do, however, have information cheats in the game. And there are a lot of reasons for this. Most of them usually come down to purely limited AI development resources. Dealing with a fog of war is a really difficult AI problem, and the benefits of really solving that problem, they just didn't outweigh the cost of having a few information cheats here or there, where the AI is looking at stuff, so it doesn't have to maintain this very complex memory system of, okay, I saw that unit there and then it moved away, so I have to remember that I saw it on that tile 5 turns ago, so it's probably somewhere in the black, blah blah blah. That's a very, very complicated system. Makes pathfinding more expensive. It leads to a lot of problems, and we didn't think that the benefits of trying to solve this problem were worthwhile. I'm sure it probably could be solved. It was just, it's one of those pure development decisions. However, you have to be really careful here, because information cheats can really backfire on you. My favorite example of this is in Civ 3. In the algorithm where I was determining what to do when doing an amphibious assault, which means the AI has a bunch of transports loaded with ground troops, and it's going to come and try to invade your continent. At some point, it's trying to determine, okay, which is the best city to land next to? Where do I want to start where do I want to have my beachhead? While I was writing the code determining this, I'm like, well, I'll be clever here. I'll go ahead and I'll look to see how well defended the human city is, or human or AI, whatever, how well defended the city is that I'm going to be attacking, because obviously I want to land where the enemy is weak. However, it didn't take long for people to figure this out, which led to this sort of amphibious assault judo problem, which was that humans realized that if you had an empty city somewhere on the coast, that was where the AI was going to invade you. So imagine you have this big, circle continent, and the AI is coming up this way with some battleships and transports to attack you. All you have to do is you move a unit out of your city on the northern side of the continent. The AI sees that. They're going to start routing their battleships up this way to come around to the top. And then, of course, once they get close enough, you just put this unit back in and take a unit out of the city in the south. And then this entire AI force will turn around and start going back down. And, you know, you have an infinite loop there. I mean, you can just keep toying with the AI back and forth and back and forth. Which, you know, I always found kind of amusing because it's fair enough that the game players found a way to abuse the AI based off of a cheat that I was doing. So, you know, good on them, right? So for Civ 4, you know, you have to be really careful about how this stuff. And so we solved this problem by, you know, randomly determining how often we were updating the assault target. And we ignored temporary data. Like we no longer looked at how many units were in the city, how many things were nearby, because I just didn't trust, myself to write code that wouldn't lead to one of these type of problems. So to say that there's information cheats is not the same thing as saying that, you know, the AI is just this kind of evil thing inside your computer that's like peeking at, you know, everything it wants to. You know, it's kind of a question of like when does that make sense for the game? When does that make sense for the player? You know, when is it you know, producing the AI that you want to, and it's not going to lead to these kind of you know, exploits and bad feelings. So essentially, you know, the big issue you run into that makes this kind of fairness or cheating problem kind of unsolvable is, you know, what I kind of term the diplomacy problem, which is, you know, why not just have the AI gang up against the human? I mean, well, okay. I mean, it's pretty obvious why you wouldn't do that, because that's not going to feel fair. But obviously, at some point, the AI should be allying with each other. So, how much is too much? How much is not enough? You know, should the human be trusted or feared the same way as the other AI? Because we all know that humans will not be as reliable as the AI. You know, should the AI do everything in its power to win? Meaning that, but could the human take advantage of that? If it does, would it know for sure that an AI would backstab another AI at the end of the game because, you know, it would do anything to desperately try to claw its way to Alpha Centauri or a military victory or whatever. You know, there's a lot of really tricky and ultimately unanswerable issues here. This leads to what I call the tech training problem, which is that here are sort of three statements that I think most people probably would agree are all true. You know, the AI must trade techs, the AI must trade fairly with each other, and that the humans can sell their techs cheaply. You know, these are all things that people believe to be true, but in fact, only two of these things can be true. It actually reminds me of kind of a classic problem that they have in the world of theology, which is, you know, it's kind of well accepted in, you know, a number of Western religions where, you know, God is all powerful, God is all good, yet evil still exists. You know, this is sort of a fundamental issue they're always grasping with. It has a term, it's called Theodicy. You know, the question is, if God is all powerful and God is all good, you know, then why do bad stuff happen to good people? You know, it's another one of these sort of classic unanswerable questions where, you know, you can see how any two of these things can be true, but together, all three of them, you know, you have problems. This is the same is true for the tech training problem. The issue here is, humans, you know, you're human, and you've got some techs, and there's an AI civ over there that's not doing very well. You know, the Germans are they only got a couple cities, they're stuck on that end of the continent, they're not doing very well, they're behind culturally and technologically and so on and so forth. So you call them up in diplomacy, and you've got ironworking. You know, it's not a tech you would normally give away to someone, or that you would trade away to a rival, but you know that the Germans are not a threat to you. You don't have to worry about them. And the Germans have 30 gold. You can give them that ironworking for 30 gold, even though it's, you know, on the open market, it's worth much more than that because, you know, it helps you in that situation. You're not losing anything by giving them ironworking, and at the end of the day, that's the only way you're going to get that 30 gold. You know, it makes sense for the human. It's the right play. Can the AI pursue that strategy? I mean, clearly you would not want them to follow a strategy like that that's so extreme of, you know, giving away a very valuable tech for nothing. But it's a spectrum here, right? I mean, the AI needs to trade techs back and forth. What is a fair value for that tech? You know, how do you determine what that number is? And you know, this is something that caused a lot of consternation when Civ 3 came out, because I think I definitely went too far in sort of thinking through this problem of like, the AI really should think about this and like try to get all the value it can from its text and be really aggressively trading technologies with each other if it doesn't have a reason to fear against the other AI. I was playing the game, trying to make I was programming the AI to play the game as a human would. And this led to a lot of unhappiness, a lot of frustration with Civ 3. People felt like the game was just rocketing forward. It led to first of all, very quick tech progression, and the sense that all the AI were always around the same tech level because they were always kind of trading, arbitraging, trying to trade text back and forth for kind of these like very small gains. It led to it just wasn't a very compelling experience. So ultimately we with Civ 4 we came up with not an answer, but a solution, I guess you could say. There's no way to come up with a definitive answer for this type of a problem. All you have to do is come up with your best estimate of where you're going to fall on the spectrum. Saying that, the AI can undersell. So what we implement with Civ 4 is we said the AI can undersell technologies to each other by 33%. But, it tries its best to make up the difference in gold. It only trades over certain random intervals of turns. So we had a knob we could adjust to determine, how quickly the AI would be trading these texts back and forth. And we used in Civ 4 we had this sort of high level logic where it said, okay, I have ironworking, you have 1,000 gold, but for various diplomatic reasons, I will never trade ironworking to you. I don't like your religion, or you attacked me earlier, or whatever. And we made sure that we used the exact same refuse to trade with logic with the humans, with human to AI trading as we did with AI to AI trading. And we, I don't know if we solved the problem, but we definitely got closer to a solution. This is just one of these art issues, not science ones. And at the end of the day, it's just very important to remember what the point of cheating is. We're not necessarily trying to write the best AI. We're not necessarily trying to beat the human. As I hope I've made clear, like the idea of being fair is often like just something that is literally impossible in a lot of these games. So it's very clear. Cheating is for challenge, which is simply one source of fun. Right? There's a lot of different sources of fun, and challenge is one of them, and that is where cheating fits in. So it's just important to keep that in mind. Which leads to this kind of interesting issue of at some point you have to answer the question of, are you designing for the AI? Is this a good thing or not? And it's definitely good to especially in a symmetrical game, when you're doing the game design, to remember the AI is going to have to handle all the gameplay options you're thinking of. So the two should definitely not be separate. You really need to design the game to consider all of these things. These 5 things I've listed here are all various things that we implemented in Civ 4, which definitely helped the AI handle the game. We had enforced peace treaties, so which meant that when you made peace with the AI, the game did not allow you to attack them for 10 turns, right? So that sort of closed that fake peace loophole that I've talked about before, that I mentioned earlier. However, with each of these aspects here, we made sure that we were not designing just for the AI. There was also a legitimate reason why we were doing this for the humans. Like with closed borders, people loved that. They were so happy that the AI couldn't haphazardly wander through their territory. They really enjoyed the fact that they had control over that now. And with enforced peace treaties, humans can't be trusted, but now in a multiplayer game of Civ, you do have a mechanism for saying, okay, we're making peace, and I know this actually means something. I know you can't attack me for 10 turns. Now it's actually an interesting diplomatic experience instead of a meaningless one. But you have to be careful here. Like it's sort of a slippery slope. It's definitely easy to go down certain paths where like, okay, am I doing this really just because I'm trying to make the game easier for the AI, or am I doing it to give the player a better time? So I think I'm running out of time here a little bit, but I'll just sort of power through some of the development details on the Civ AI. One thing that's kind of unique about Civ is the AI has always been written by the game's designer. with Civ 1, it was Sid. With Civ 2, it was Brian Reynolds, and I wrote it for Civ 3 and 4. It was pretty small. We had it all located in just 10 files that were completely separate from game data or game code or engine code or anything like that. It was all just AI code. It was about 25,000 lines of code. This gives you kind of a perspective of the percentage, inside the entire code base. Testing the AI is a big problem. As I mentioned earlier, we had sort of an automated testing system. But the real key to getting the Civ 4 AI in good shape was that we had a closed beta of about 100 users for about a year and a half before we released, which was it started only a year after we started the project. We really wanted to get people in front of the Civ 4 AI as soon as possible. That was really key, and so we called people from the various forums and people, various fans we'd worked with over the years that we knew were good and reliable, and it made an absolute huge difference in improving the quality, that sort of subjective, hard to define quality of the AI. We have soft-coded AI, and what this means is, there's no AI scripts in the game, there's no enums, there's no point in the AI where it ever says, okay, build a warrior, then build a temple, then build a settler, blah, blah, blah. The actual AI code has no concept of any of these things. Everything is, in a sense, made generic, and part of the reason for this is for the modders. But it's also just a different AI design philosophy. It leads to sort of a less brittle code situation where something isn't going to just suddenly crash because, or something isn't just going to suddenly break because I might take temples out of the game, for example, or I might change their value. And here's sort of an example of what I'm talking about here. Like in a game with enums, this is how you might determine what building to build in your city. You might just arbitrarily assign a value of 20 to your temples when deciding what to build. In Civ 4, what we would do is we would assign a value. We'd sort of break up, why do people want temples? Well, if you have an angry population, we'll give a certain value to the amount of happiness provides, and we'll also give a certain amount of value to the culture that building produces. And the advantage here is that as we tweak those numbers up and down over the course of the game, theoretically the AI will adapt. Which means that the core reasoning that goes on in the Civ AI is sort of this basic sort of probabilistic reasoning system where it assigns weights to just all these different factors of what a tech gives you, what a unit gives you, what a building gives you. Add some random noise, adjust to the current situation, which is really important. That if it's on its own continent, it really needs to start teching up for exploration techs, that type of thing. Adds a little bit of randomness and then makes a decision. That's sort of the core engine behind most of the Civ AI. Here's a sort of a code example of looking at the different tech values. So, for example, if you've met a lot of civs, it's going to add some extra value to the open borders trading technology, which means you can, because you'll want to engage in diplomacy with these civs, that's a good thing. And if you have coastal cities, it's even better because you'll have extra trade routes. So, this is sort of the basics of how the AI works. And one of the nice, cool side benefits here is it enables a lot of very data-driven mods. Probably the most popular Civ 3 mod was one called Double Your Pleasure, which was sort of the traditional thing that a lot of hardcore fans want. They want a game with 1,000 units and 500 techs and 400 buildings. They want a huge amount of variety. It's something we would never do in the core game, but because we had this sort of soft-coded AI, it was able to handle it. I'm not going to pretend like it handled it perfectly or whatever, but it didn't just completely fall apart. And in Civ 4, Fall from Heaven is another sort of good example of this, where they could add. This is the list that shows all the promotions in the game, and as you can see, they've added a ton of them that were built specifically for that mod, and the AI was able to handle it pretty well. The last kind of step here that I want to talk about is that because we built the AI in its own little sort of vacuum, along with actually, for that matter, the rest of the game code, we were able to basically give its own project, and instead of compiling it into the EXE, we compiled it into a standalone DLL. And what this allowed people to do is they could compile their own DLLs that had their own game rules, their own AI rules, have it function however it wanted to, and then it could replace our core game DLL for mods. Whether those were total conversion mods or even just standard Civ4 mods, people just wanted the AI to function differently. So it was 100%. That code was 100% independent of the engine. It wasn't even platform specific. So it was really cool to be able to do that, and it allowed people to really extend the functionality of the game. The Fall from Heaven mod, which is a very cool Civ4 mod, I'd really recommend it for people who are interested in Civ4 mods. They added a magic system to the game, which obviously was not in the game to begin with, and was only possible if they really had access to that code. This led to some interesting AI projects. The Community Enhancement Project was like this sort of a group of modders who got together and said, okay, we all know that there's some basic things we want to change about the core game DLL. Let's all do it together so we don't have 1,000 of these. Everyone has their own flavor of it, basically. There was a genetic AI project where someone put a genetic learning algorithm inside the Civ4 AI, and it would communicate up with the net and pull down the latest the latest best performer, and then also and then reevaluate based on performance within the game. Led to some kind of interesting results. But then it had the classic opposite approach as well, which was some guy named Blake in his bedroom who wrote a better Civ4 AI. Just decided to do it on his own, and he did a great job. It became its own very, very popular Civ4 download, and got a lot of respect among the Civ community, enough so that eventually he came on to Firaxis as a contractor and has worked on the last Civ4 expansion. I wouldn't be surprised if the company does work with him in the future. Also a nice way to find a great AI programmer. That's for sure. So here's a link to the Civ4 code. It's obviously you can Google it and it's not hard to find. But you can download it, compile it yourself. Have fun. And it looks like we maybe have 2 minutes for questions, something like that. But that's it. Thank you. Oh, sure. No problem. There you go. Oops. Sorry. Go ahead.
So you had a lecture at this being a turn-based AI.
Right.
How would you, have you had any experience with real-time AI? I know that it can be more limited in that they can take out per frame.
Right.
Strictly only for like turn-based AI.
Well, the funny thing about Civ is Civ4 is actually a real-time game because it's in multiplayer and it runs with turn timers and it runs with simultaneous movement. So we actually built it as a real-time game and then had sort of this turn-based system layered on top of it. That was the only way we felt like we get multiplayer to work. Gosh, I don't even remember how we split that up, but we did. I think the biggest problem, generally speaking, with Civ was unit pathfinding. That's the thing that always really chokes up the AI. Everything else is fairly trivial. So I think we just had a system of counting up how many units we would update per quarter second, which was our turn time, basically. And that seemed to work out well enough. If we were a real hardcore RTS, we'd have to obviously focus a lot more detail on this. But yeah, time slicing is very difficult. Sure. No. This is dynamic difficulty level is obviously a pretty big topic, and I definitely fall on the side of the spectrum where I feel that it really should be up to the player. I don't want to think for the player whether they want an easy experience or a hard experience or so on and so forth. And we did some of that in Civ 3, but I wasn't convinced that it really gave us good results. And beyond that, it's really difficult to tell what the effects of, like, how to tell if the numbers that you're assuming are right are actually correct, right? I mean, someone says they're playing on, Prince and they got these type of results, but was the AI sandbagging on Prince, or was it, accelerating on Prince? It became pretty difficult. I mean, it's an interesting topic, and, I think definitely some interesting stuff can be done, but for Civ 4, there is none of it, no. All right, I think that's probably it. Thanks for coming.